Getting into the CFP top 10 here, I'm going to run through it and then we will discuss. We had Georgia at number 1, Bama at number 2, Michigan State coming in at number 3, Oregon at number 4, Ohio State at 5, Cincinnati at 6. So those are your 4 in and then your first 2 that are left out of the deal. Then you got Michigan coming in at 7, undefeated Oklahoma coming in at number 8, Wake at number 9, another undefeated team, and then Notre Dame at number 10. Running through the rest of the Big Ten teams at 20, you've got Minnesota. At 21, you've got Wisconsin. 22, you've got Iowa. Between the Big Ten and the SEC, half of the ranked teams come from those two conferences, and Cincinnati achieves the highest ranking for a group of 5 team in college football playoff history. So just looking at that top 10 right there, what are your initial thoughts?
I have no surprises with Georgia and Bama. It's interesting too because we're this is so fresh. We're starting to get a feel for how the college football playoff does it. You know, it was different even than the BCS when we were coming up, all the analytics and stuff. So I do think Michigan State definitely merits that. And the beauty of them being at 3 right now is that even though there are some arguments as to why they shouldn't be there, they can answer all those questions coming up here down the pipe. So I think that's the beauty of that. And I'm happy that they gave them the nod there. Really being the last unbeaten in the East, right? And then Oregon obviously beat Ohio State, and they've been taking care of business out there. Haven't really let things down. I don't think we get as much coverage of them. So just being on the East Coast, they're not as visible. But they've obviously been doing what they needed to do out there and will have themselves a chance. And then Ohio State, you know, you and I have talked about it. I think they're top to bottom, the best representative right now as it sits of the Big Ten, but we'll see. And then really just having Oklahoma and Wake kind of down there at 8-9, like both undefeated. But I think that just goes to show about how they view the strength of both of those conferences. Yes. Obviously the ACC is way down. And with the Big 12 out there, you know, it's interesting. And Oklahoma still has to earn it here. You know, I think they got Baylor still, Iowa State, which always seems to give them some issues, and they have someone else too, Oklahoma State. So that's interesting to me. But I think it's a good starting point. I think it gives us and the fans a lot to talk about. And the beauty is a lot of these teams on the upper end of that still have to go prove some things. So it'll be interesting moving forward.
Yeah, and I think what's super interesting is the thing you talked about in terms of the strength of the different conferences. And I think if you're Oklahoma, you're probably in a little bit of a better position than if you're Wake Forest, than if you're Oregon, honestly, because you at least have some brands and some names that'll turn eyeballs a little bit, turn heads just in terms of performances they could stack up. And being at number 8 isn't insurmountable. It's just not ideal, especially as an undefeated team. The Oregon-Ohio State thing, I think, is exactly what it needs to be. I think Oregon has earned the right to be in the top 4. They've definitely earned the right to be ranked ahead of Ohio State with that head-to-head. And I know people will bring up the loss to Stanford, which is not a good football team. But at the same time, I think that the head-to-head at this juncture of the season should matter, right? And if you're Ohio State, you have every opportunity because you've got Michigan, who's a top 10 team right now, still out there. You've got Michigan State, who is in the top 4 as of right now, still out there. Yeah. And then you'll have one of the teams in the West who would be a top 20 win at the time, probably, to beat in the Big Ten championship if you can overcome those hurdles in the East. So I think that's a really interesting spot to be in for Ohio State. As I look at the rest of it, I feel bad for Cincinnati. They're just not going to get the respect. And they have a top 10 win on the road, which I think should count for something, but everybody's going to point to the rest of their schedule. And I understand that because they're not playing the level of competition that a team specifically from the SEC or the Big Ten is playing, but they're handling their business. And you can know, they have clunky wins, but we've seen teams lose as well. We've seen Ohio State lose. We've seen Oregon lose. We've seen Michigan lose. We've seen Bama lose, right? I mean, teams drop games. The last 2 I'll talk about is I think Michigan has a very favorable spot right now. And it's not to say that they wouldn't have earned that, because losing close to a team that you believe is one of the 4 best in the conference should knock you a ton, but they also don't have a top 25 win. It's not like Ohio State has a top 25 win either. Well, no, Penn State's not in this deal.
Yeah.
So, it's one of those situations, but I think Michigan's got it favorable. The one that stands out to me, though, is Bama. And the reason I say that is Bama would be ranked in the same place, in my opinion, whether they were undefeated or they had the loss to Texas A&M. And it's just wild, right? And they have some work to do at the end of their schedule, but just seeing them at number 2, like, people trust that the Crimson Tide will deliver regardless.
I agree with you. And that's interesting. And where I think if this plays out, if Ohio State or Michigan State runs the table against that 4-headed monster in the East, if one of those teams, obviously one of them is going to run it. So whomever runs it, if they run it, as long as Penn State doesn't play spoiler or Michigan play spoiler here, I think it'll be really interesting to see if Bama loses to Georgia, if they still take Bama. And let's say an Oklahoma runs it, or Cincinnati continues to run it and starts getting hot. Now you're going to sit there and say, okay, we have a laundry list of 1 or undefeateds, and we're going to throw 2-loss Bama in there. Granted, their 2 losses are to great teams, but that's where the real argument starts. Now, if Bama goes out and beats Georgia in the SEC championship game, you take both of them again and you go. Right. But I think if Georgia comes out and beats Bama in the SEC championship game, that's Cincinnati's best shot, as long as they continue to handle business in a dominating fashion. They have to do it in a dominating fashion.
They're going to need the style points 100%.
Yeah.
If Bama would lose to Georgia in the SEC championship, it'd be the first time a 2-loss team would get in if that were the case. That'd be really interesting to see. I'm trying to think of a scenario where you might be able to talk the committee into putting both Ohio State and Michigan State in there, right? Because if you are Michigan State and your only loss of the season comes to Ohio State and it's a close loss, that is a conversation that people would need to have.
Yeah. The only thing that I think is going to hurt the Big Ten is traditionally, I don't think they've had. It's just going to go back to resume. It's like I think Oklahoma is going to get the benefit of the doubt if Oklahoma goes out and wins, just because of history and how they've gotten in there before, and they've been.
They shouldn't, though, because they've gotten in there and they've laid eggs.
I agree, but they've still gotten in there and they've still been it. So that'd be interesting. And obviously, us being Big Ten guys, I'd make that case 10 times out of 10. If you got a 1-loss Michigan State and a 1-loss Ohio State, like, they're both just to be able to survive the conference in that manner, as strong as it's been this year, Yeah, no,
I'm with you. And this will be interesting as this kind of unfolds week to week. We'll have the conversation about it. I think this first one gives us a lot to talk about and a lot to look forward to as we get into some of these games for the upcoming week.